Real members around here. Little Potter from Grape Street.
That's on Grape. Hey, listen, man. That's on Young.
PC who?
PRMOSB joined down Grape Street. Little Potter, you know what it is on the dead homies. If you know, you know. If you know, you know. If you know, you know. Little Potter is where? Not arguing with no trolls. I'm not finna go back and forth with no in this world. On Beezy.
This is a homicide in progress. Watch closely. First, you see 3 vehicles drive by. Detectives say they've spotted them on other cameras too, driving in tandem, all of them part of what happens next. Triple shooting, 3 people shot. It blew out the back window of Dugall's car and hit the power box of the gas station, knocking out the power. When the gunsmoke settled, Dugall was dead, his girlfriend and a homeless man critically wounded, and the shooter gone.
But what I'm not finna do is let another smother. Everybody always gonna have something bad to say about another on Grape, especially when they got motion and they don't. PRMOSB joined down Grape Street, Little Potter, you know what it is, I'm the dead homies.
In today's video, we're gonna be speaking about Lil Powder from Grape Street. We're gonna break down how him and 6 other members of Grape Street would be accused of committing 3 separate shootings in a matter of 3 hours. And these shootings would leave 7 people wounded and 1 dead. And we're also going to break down how majority of his co-defendants would turn their back on him and take the stand or give a statement. But let's dive right into it. We're going to take you back to August 3rd of 2016. And on that night, Lil Powder and a bunch of Grape Street members would meet up in the Jordan Downs. And it's alleged that they would come up with a plan to retaliate against some bounty hunters. And allegedly a few weeks before they came up with this plan, somebody from Grape Street who was a high-ranking member would be murdered by a member of bounty hunters. But they're alleging that on the night of August 3rd of 2016, somebody named Vernon Williams, who was an alleged leader and shot caller for the Grape Streets, was the one that came up with that plan and told everybody what to do, and everybody followed at Williams' direction. They would all then jump into 3 separate cars and stay in communication on their cell phones. Williams, who they're alleging was the shot caller, would jump into a Mercedes with somebody named Bradford, and they would be the lead car, and their job was to look for the targets. Then 3 other people would jump into the Lexus, which would be the decoy vehicle, and the final vehicle would be a Nissan, which would have Lil Powder and 2 other people inside of it, and we're going to refer to them as the shooter vehicle. And the first place that they would drive to would be the Howard Hughes Center. This would be a shopping center, and like we said, Williams, who was the shot caller, came up with this plan. So I think it's safe to say that he probably got the drop that there was a bounty hunter blood out there driving a Maserati, because that's the type of vehicle that they would be looking for. Williams would then spot the Maserati, and he would identify the driver as somebody from bounty hunters. That's when the shooter vehicle that had Lil Powder in it would open fire on the Maserati, and all 3 people inside of the shooter vehicle would open fire on the vehicle, hitting the driver of the Maserati. Thankfully, nobody would pass away in the situation, but the driver would have to be treated for multiple gunshots. And shortly after that shooting happened, they would return back to Watts, and they would pick up an AK. And as you can see right there, they're alleging that Williams, who was the shot caller, was not satisfied with the first shooting. So he would tell all 3 vehicles to head to the Nickerson Gardens after they picked up that AK. They would then pull up to the Nickerson Gardens and circle around a few times. They would then see a group standing in the field, and that's when Lil Powder would park the Nissan, and a Grape Street member with the last name Lawson would open fire on the group until his pistol was empty. And the other passenger, whose last name was Smith, had the AK, and he was attempting to put one in the chamber, but he couldn't. So Smith wasn't able to fire any shots, but nobody would be hit in the shooting. And the next shooting would happen about an hour later after this. This would be the last shooting though. And this one would happen at a gas station across the street from the Nickerson Gardens. The 3 carfuls of Grape Street members would drive by the gas station, and they would notice Cordero and his vehicle parked outside. That's when they would pull into the gas station. That's when Smith, who was in the backseat of the Nissan, would roll down the window, and they would exchange words, and then Smith would open fire with the AK. He would kill Cordero, and he would wound 2 others, including his girlfriend. And this shooting would take place at 12:50 in the morning at the 76 gas station across the street from Nickerson Gardens, like we said. And this right here would be Dugal Cordero, who lost his life the night of the shooting, and may he rest in peace. But let's not forget that this whole thing was caught on camera. So less than 2 hours after the shooting and the murder, the Lexus, who was the decoy car, would be pulled over and the occupants would be arrested. This would happen around 3 o'clock in the morning on August 4th. But later on that night of August 4th of 2016, the occupants of the Nissan would be pulled over, and they would also be arrested. And this would be the car full of shooters. This would be the car with Lil Powder and 2 other people. And they would all be booked and arrested that same exact day of August 4th of 2016. But this right here is where things get tricky. Because like we mentioned before, Smith, who was the one with the AK and was the one who pulled the trigger when somebody lost their life that night, would give statements to police and cooperate as soon as he stepped foot into the police station. He would admit to detectives that he was part of the group from Grape Street that committed the shootings at the Nickerson Gardens, at the gas station, and at the shopping center. But this is where things get crazy, because Smith, who was the shooter, also told police that the gang forced him to participate in the shootings. He would tell police that they physically assaulted him and held him at gunpoint and told him to jump into the Nissan. He would also say that they forced him to hold the AK in the back seat. But during his interrogation, he would give a bunch of inconsistent statements about where he was seated in the vehicle. He would also tell police that Lil Powder and Lawson were the ones that shot at the crowd at the Nickerson Gardens. And don't forget, that situation right there, Lil Powder was just the driver, and Smith and Lawson were both the shooters. And he would also blame Lawson for the murder at the gas station, saying he was the one that fired the AK-47 out the back seat. And with the evidence they gathered, including the statements of Smith putting everybody on the scene, they would be charged with 1 count of murder, 3 counts of attempted murder, 2 counts of shooting at a vehicle, and 1 count of possession of a firearm by a felon. But Smith wasn't the only one who gave a statement, because the second shooter, who was Lawson, would also give a statement in exchange for a plea agreement. And don't forget, in the shooter vehicle would be Lil Powder driving, and then the other 2 shooters would be Smith and Lawson. And so far, both of them gave statements. And the next person who would give a statement in exchange for a plea agreement would be Bradford. But before we dive into that, I just feel like I need to mention that Vernon Williams, who we spoke about earlier, was not charged in this case at all. And he would be the one that was riding in the Mercedes with Bradford. And he was also the one that they claim was the shot caller and telling them what to do. So I don't even get how he didn't get arrested, because Bradford, who was in the vehicle with him, was arrested. And like we just read in the paperwork, they know he was present for everything, because there would be 3 people giving statements. They would all have to sit in the county jail for the next 4 years, however.
Boy, listen, this crazy how these niggas get the snitching. Me and Brody, we done went up on a mission. Flocka went to detective, the shooter and turn witness. Boy, listen, this crazy how these niggas get the snitching. Me and Brody, we done went up on a mission. Flocka went to detective, the shooter and turn witness. These niggas, how the my right-hand man turn into a witness. This crazy on my motherfucking baby. 30 minutes at the station, he already made a statement. Damn. This shit amazing. This shit interview 100 pages. Mad at me because this ass couldn't hang out. Went and told them lies and got a young banged out gang. That's what it's about though. How you holler gang, but then you going on your mouth. This shit is wicked. I don't even get it. How the driver say solid, but the shooter did the snitching. Thugging. I can't even lie on. Baby, look, I did some busting. Now I'm sitting here, locked up with cancer, trying to use the phone, but don't nobody want to answer. Boy, listen.
He would then start trial in January of 2020. And during the trial, Lawson, who was one of the shooters, and Bradford would testify against Lil Powder and Smith, who was also one of the shooters. But don't forget that Lil Powder was just the driver. And on top of that, they would also have statements from Smith that he made at the police station. And they would also have surveillance footage of the whole entire thing. But after about a month, on February 6th of 2020, he would be convicted by a jury and found guilty on all counts. For count 1, he would get life without parole. Count 2, he would get life. But as you can see at the bottom, he would have to run that consecutive. Count 3 would be the same thing, life. And as you can see at the bottom, he would have to run that consecutive also. On count 4, he would get 15 years to life. Count 5, he would get life again. And as you can see at the bottom, he would have to run that consecutive also. And count 6, he would get 15 years to life. And as you can see at the bottom, he would have to run that consecutive also. And this right here would be how he got 7 life sentences. Because as you can see, count 1 is life without parole, plus an additional 25 to life. So that would be 2 life sentences just for count 1. Count 2 life. Count 3, life. Count 4, life. Count 5, life. Count 6, life. And in red, all counts are to run consecutive. And it's crazy because he was just the driver, and the shooters are the one that told on him. Lawson, who was 18 years old at that time, would receive 28 years in prison and be eligible for parole and 13 for his statement. And Bradford, who was 19 years old at that time, would get 9 years in prison in exchange for his statement. And on February 5th of 2020, which was a day before Lil Powder was convicted, Smith, who was the shooter and the one who gave the statements, would be found guilty by a jury and he would be convicted, but he would be acquitted on 2 counts. And on count 1, which would be the murder, he would get life without parole. Count 2, he would get life. And as you see at the bottom, count 2 has to run consecutive with count 1. And on count 3, he would get life again. And as you can see at the bottom, he would have to run that consecutive also. On count 4, he would get 15 years to life. And then the last count, he would get 3 years. But that right there would be the story of Lil Powder from Grape Street. And I appreciate y'all for tuning in. But comment, like, and subscribe. It's Respectable Rants.